Hi, and welcome to Open, the show that opens the Bronx and the rest of the world to you. I'm Kibin Alleyne, and today we'll update you on what's happening in and around our borough. Coming up, for the first time since 2001, the U.S. Army is introducing a new modern brand redefining what it means to be all you can be. The Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army joins me to tell us more. What are the core components of this new campaign? Then, March is known as National Disabilities Awareness Month. This month is used to provide understanding, encouragement, and opportunities to help people with disabilities to lead productive and fulfilling lives. The CEO and president and a health home advocacy specialist for ICSNY joins me to tell us more about their organization. How can we offer better support to this community? After that, a new study from the CDC shows a rise in sexual violence towards teen girls. The executive director for the New York City Alliance Against Sexual Assault joins me to discuss the findings in this data. What caused this rise in sexual violence towards teen girls? And finally, Sanchocho is a new play about two Puerto Rican sisters who are facing family tension while dealing with their father's declining health. Author and playwright for Sanchocho tells us more about her new play. So stay tuned, all this and much more is headed your way because we're now officially open. Hello everyone, I'm Kibin Alleyne and today is Tuesday, March 21st. You are now watching Open, a program that is bringing the Bronx and New York City straight to you. Don't forget to stay connected with us via social media at BronxNet.TV. For the first time in 22 years, the U.S. Army redefines what it means to be all you can be, hoping to connect to a new generation. The brand and its surrounding campaign spotlights several opportunities in the Army. Chief of Staff General James C. McConville now joins me to discuss. General, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thanks for having us.
Now, I want to talk about Be All You Can Be. What led the Army to refresh the brand and redefine what it means to be all you can be?
Well, we think Be All You Can Be answers the question of why a young man or woman should consider joining the military, or why their parents should want their kids to join the military, because you can do anything you want to do in the United States Army, and you can be all you can be, and that's a pathway to success for American youth.
Now, what are the core components of the new brand and surrounding campaign?
What you're going to see is commercials coming out. They're showing already. We're very pleased to have Jonathan Majors as our narrator on the commercials. He shows the history of the United States Army, and he resonates very, very well with young men and women today.
Now, can you expand on how the Army offers possibilities with over 200 careers and countless benefits?
Yeah, we see limitless possibilities in the United States Army. We're certainly famous for being masters of combat arms, but we have doctors, we have lawyers, we have nurses, we have pilots, we have cyber experts, we have musicians. Pretty much anything you want to do in life, the United States Army has that capability, and we want to expose the American people to those opportunities.
Now, why was it so important to highlight that? I think a lot of people often just believe that there's just only one way to be successful in the Army. Why was it important to highlight that?
Well, I think there's limitless possibilities to be successful, and what you'll get, no matter what role you assume in the Army, you'll get leadership training. You'll get education, you'll get discipline, you'll have the opportunity to get fit with the world's greatest health clubs. So there's just a tremendous amount of opportunities in the United States Army. Whether you stay 4 or 40 years, you'll come out of the Army a much better person, much more marketable in the civilian sector, and a much better citizen in the community.
Now, I think community is also like a huge part of, I guess, anybody's, career and just like where they want to go in life. How does this allow soldiers to build community, continue their education, and even possibly start a family?
Well, first of all, as far as community, in the military, when you serve, you become kind of part of the veteran corps, if you will. And as far as education, we have tuition assistance, we have GI Bill. There's tremendous amount of training. You spend your entire career getting training, and then as far as benefits, I think having a family, what we see right now is the benefits in the Army match any other industry as far as maternity or paternal leave. So there is an opportunity to have a family. In fact, I have three sons, three kids, two sons and a daughter that grew up in the military, and now they serve in the military.
And then can you just talk a little bit more about maybe in some ways that you've seen community be strengthened by, joining this particular community?
Well, what I see with the community is, first of all, when you join the Army, you become part of the Army community. You're a soldier for life, whether you serve 4 years or 40 years. And, if you have a chance to talk to veterans in the community, most will say, serving in the military was one of the most important things that they did in their life. And they come back to that community and they bring leadership, they bring discipline, and they bring a commitment to the United States that I think is very important for every community.
Now, I think it's important, again, to note that this is, to refresh and, just build something for the new generation. Can you talk about what the needs of the new generation are or is?
Yeah, well, I think, every generation to be successful. And, when we look at the new generation, they want to have an opportunity to do something with purpose. They want to have an opportunity to take advantage of their talents. And I think that's what the Army offers them, is a chance certainly to do something bigger than themselves, certainly to have a job that has purpose. But we're going to assess them and determine what their skill sets are, and then get them in the right job where they can benefit the most.
And you talked about being successful in the Army. Like, what would you say is like maybe the top two things somebody from the new generation would need to, be successful and to kind of support their community around them?
Well, I think with the success that comes out of the Army is it's really leadership and discipline. You'll get leadership experience, and you'll also get discipline. And by discipline, it's just learning how to be committed to an organization. Getting up at a certain time in the morning, completing your tasks, and being someone that the American people trust to do the right thing the right way.
Now, we're also talking, I guess, just about like moving towards the future. How is the Army modernizing its programs to appeal to a newer generation?
Well, if you take a look at the commercials that we have, and you take a look at who is narrating our commercials, it's one of the big stars, Jonathan Majors, so he can relate to the young men and women. We're also sending out some of our top soldiers to go back to their high schools and communities and talk about how the Army has helped them on their pathway to success. And then the other thing we're appealing to the young men and women today is the Army is very high in technology. All our soldiers are using technology no matter where they are on the battlefield. Artificial intelligence, we need coders on the battlefield. Everyone is using devices that require a certain amount of technology skills. So we think that's all going to appeal to the young men and women today.
Well, General, thank you so much for joining us to talk about this.
Thank you.
Don't go away. We'll be right back with more Open right after this.
Even though we didn't grow up together, he's my favorite brother.
Hey, sis.
I'm the baby of the family, and he's the gentle giant.
What you know about Port Georgia?
Man, please, that's a classic.
You know when they say people are a rare breed? Yeah, he's that.
I'm sorry, I'll be back in a few hours.
Don't worry, Shaq. You know I'm for you.
I know.
Go get the football.
That was my favorite memory. He was always for ya. This is a true story of me, Bridget Floyd, And this guy, George Perry Floyd Jr., my big brother.
Dear moms and dads, what you have achieved here today is going to help us and our futures. It is why we are coming up on stage to collect your diplomas.
You know it's true.
Mom, love you always.
Everything I do.
When you graduate, they graduate. Visit finishyourdiploma.org to find free and supportive adult education centers near you.
Found my heart out there in the open. Trees make you feel small. Can't help but get lost again.
Feel the beat of nature at a park or forest near you. Find a forest and music inspired by nature at discovertheforest.org.
Is it time yet?
It's time.
Punch down chocolate sugar.
Oh, it's real good.
Donating pet food is one of the many ways you can help families in your community. Pets and people belong together. Learn more at petsandpeopletogether.org.
You're not going to get it all right. Just make sure you nail the big stuff.
Mama!
Like making sure your kids are in the right seat for their age and size. Get it right at nhtsa.gov/the-right-seat.
Welcome back. According to the CDC, up to 1 in 4 adults in the United States have a disability. In the month of March, agencies and organizations work towards increasing public awareness of the contributions and the potential of Americans with disabilities. Join me to discuss disability awareness and the organization who helps support those with disabilities is CEO and President of Independence Care System, Regina Martinez-Estela, and a health home advocacy specialist for ICSNY, Marcus Johnson. I want to thank you both for joining me.
Good morning. Thank you for having us.
Now, Regina, can you tell me about the Independence Care System?
Yes, absolutely. ICS is a nonprofit organization with a mission of supporting people, adults with physical disabilities, to live independently in the community. We were founded in 2000 by a group of innovative professionals and consumers who came together with the goal of creating an organization that listened to the community that we sought to serve and responded by developing programs to meet their needs. We are the first and only health home in New York State designated to serve adults with physical disabilities. The health home is not a place. It's a comprehensive program that focuses on supporting members to remain healthy, mobile, and independent in the community.
Now, Regina, what are some ways ICS acknowledges Disability Awareness Month?
Well, disability awareness is not an event at ICS. It's core to our values and principles, so it's something that we practice every day of the year. We do appreciate the attention that dedicating a month to these kinds of issues brings to the issues of disabilities. So to give you a few examples of things that we have done and that we are doing, we, as an organization, we watched together the film Crip Camp. And Crip Camp is a film about a young group of people with physical disabilities at summer camp and the resulting disability rights movement that grew from those people coming together. We watched the movie as a organization. We came together in discussion groups, and then we invited Judy Heumann, and Marcus led us in a discussion with Judy Heumann to discuss the movie. And Judy Heumann was a extraordinary woman who is frequently referred to as one of the founders of the disability rights movement in this country. And sadly, she recently passed away. But that's one example of how we recognize disability awareness and how we work in that area.
And Marcus, can you actually tell me a little bit more about that experience?
It was just so moving to, if anyone knows about Judy Heumann and what she has contributed to the community of people with disabilities, it was just an extraordinary moment where I got to speak to one of our leaders in the movement, the icon. And the whole organization was wide on the Zoom call, and it was a fire rap questioning with Judy Human, and I believe the whole organization gained from it, where they were able to interject, ask questions, and see where we were moving forward or where we're going with the community of people with disabilities and going from disability rights to disability justice.
Now, Marcus, can you just also explain, what are some challenges and barriers that people with disabilities face that others may not automatically recognize?
Oh, we face, other than this constant stereotyping, the stigma and the discrimination, people in the community need to understand that for people with disabilities to get great access to health care, we are faced with the barriers of attitudinal barriers, physical barriers or architectural barriers, and most definitely systemic barriers. But the most by far difficult is the attitudinal barriers, because people's perceptions are impacting our reality. So people believe what we can and cannot do. And we can do a whole lot if people would stop limiting us, and we would just stop being ordinary, because we're extraordinary in that sense. And that's the attitude, because I can't change people's perceptions of how they believe I can be, but I try to be present all the time and to change that narrative. And physical accessibility is a big issue. We can't even get into medical facilities, and if we can't, and then when we get in, it's challenging because the hospital tables don't go up and down. The examination tables don't, and it's challenging to get onto tables. Staff is not aware of how to assist people with physical disabilities or disabilities in general. And systemically, policies are being made all the time without our presence there. So though it's those three barriers that are impacting people with disabilities on a daily basis.
Now, the hospital was mentioned, and I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because, Regina, I wanted to ask you, according to the ICS, people with disabilities face disparities, making them more vulnerable to lower health outcomes. Can you just expand on this a little bit more? I think we may have heard why we hear some of those outcomes, but can you expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. In New York State, 1 in 5 people has a disability, and 11% of the population has limited mobility. But building on what Marcus was just talking about, there are physical barriers, so the things that Marcus talked about in terms of height adjustable tables that would allow somebody with a disability to be able to transfer onto that table, weight scales that are wheelchair accessible so that somebody can roll onto the scale and be weighed. But let me just give you a very concrete example. About a week ago, we had a group of 20 members in our Bronx office who were meeting with State Senator Rivera, who's a representative from the Bronx. And he asked them, and the group was ranged in age from, 20s to their 60s, all wheelchair users. And he asked this group of people whether or not they had ever been examined outside of their wheelchairs during a primary care visit. And not one person in that room could say that they had been examined outside of their wheelchair during a primary care visit. That just speaks volumes to the equity issues, the health equity issues that people with physical disabilities face, and then the resulting disparities, right? So people with physical disabilities or women with physical disabilities are no more likely, for example, to get breast cancer, but they are much more likely to die of breast cancer prematurely. And why is that? The reason is because they have less access to mammography screening, and so therefore they are diagnosed later, and they receive less aggressive treatment once they are diagnosed, because we value their lives less. Marcus spoke to the issue of preparing medical personnel, clinicians, to work with people with physical disabilities. There is no medical school curricula, nursing school curricula today that speaks to the needs of people with disabilities. And could you just imagine a doctor or a nurse coming out of their clinical training and not learning about diabetes management? more people in the United States have a disability than diabetes, but we don't train our clinical professionals to know about disability. And a few things that ICS is doing around that is we worked with Health and Hospitals Corporation to develop access to mammography. So now the Health and Hospitals Corporation in every borough has trained staff that can perform mammographies on women with physical disabilities, increasing their access to preventative care. And just this week, we launched a program with Woodhull Hospital to create a center of excellence for primary care for people with physical disabilities. So it can be done. We just have to invest in it.
Now, Marcus, can you tell me a little bit more about your advocacy efforts?
Oh, we've done a great deal with Independence Care System being by our side. And I co-lead a group called Civics League for Disability Rights with my co-leader, Sharifa Abuhanda. And what we've done for our members, we have a platform that speaks to our concerns. And it's been so effective. We've got the New York State Department of Health to meet with us on a quarterly basis to address our concerns, and concerns that we have definitely trying to, where we have our working wheelchairs in our home, and we have a backup wheelchair just in case something happens to our primary care. Our primary care, we also work efforts where our members can have more catheters. It's funny to tell a little story. A catheter is where individuals that cannot void or pee on their own need a catheter to help them do that, perform that action that people take for granted. And they were giving us one time 60, and our advocacy work has made it where we get 90 catheters in a month. So we can pee more than twice a day. You know, people don't take that for granted. But now that our advocacy work has done that, they have allotted more catheters for us to perform what we need to do to live in our community and in a host household in a healthy way. So our efforts have made great changes in the community. And right now, what we're doing with the Independence Care System by our side with the Civics League that I'm part of, we're working for a specialized program for people with physical disabilities. And when I say specialized, I mean equitable. Equitable program that meets the needs of people with physical disabilities.
Now, can you actually, I believe, can you just talk about the need for a specialized health home plan just to further support people with disabilities?
I didn't hear the first part of the question.
The need for a specialized health home plan to further support people with disabilities.
Oh yeah, it's. I'm sure Regina can speak to it as well. It's that there's many other programs out there that the Department of Health definitely look to, like mental health and hygiene, AIDS and HIV, and intellectual disabilities. But people with physical disabilities, we want to stay in the community, and how we can stay in the community is having coordinated disability competent care, and ICS is that. Their care has allowed me to stay in the community 31 years. This year I'll be at home 32 years, and I have yet to be hospitalized on a long-term basis because ICS has brought that component where we have our expert nurse that handles pressure wounds, and that's something I cope with. But the fact that we have somebody in our organization and on our team, I've had doubts with it, but I have come through because they've been by my side. And I can talk for other members as well, where they reach out, listen, this is what you need to do. We're going to provide you with this. We're going to provide you with that. So they have changed the way our community of people with disabilities lives independently in our community.
Now, I want to ask, I think this is so important to know, Regina, why is it important that your organization is the only organization that has expert staff to deal with people or to assist people with disabilities?
Yeah, so I mean, just building on what Marcus just said and what it means to have disability competent staff and what it means to be expert in working with people with physical disabilities we over our 20-year history, what we have learned is what are those things and situations that lead to poor health outcomes for people with physical disabilities. And what we learned in those 20 years is that it is things like pressure injuries or wounds, urinary tract infections, respiratory infections. And so, and I think a very, very key component about what we do is that we work alongside our members so that we are not the experts. Our members are the experts in their care, and we collaborate with them to understand their needs and then to work to meet those needs and to train our staff to be able to identify those risk areas and address them before they become an issue that requires a hospitalization. And that's why we need experts in this area, because without that, people with physical disabilities would not, there is no other program that can do this today, and they would not be getting that care. And so when Marcus says that he has been injured for 32 years and has not had a hospitalization in that period of time, or he's been living at home, it's remarkable. I don't know that we can give you enough emphasis on how remarkable that is. And it is because we work with Marcus. Marcus tells us, and Marcus knows his body better than we do. And but in working together, we bring the clinical expertise and Marcus brings the knowledge about himself. And together we're able to achieve those kinds of outcomes. In the spirit of nothing about us without us, right, Marcus?
Exactly.
I want to thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks, Kibin, for having us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Right back with more Open right after this.
I'm an ex-drug dealer, and I'll be your sub today. Can you see anything different as a pill?
No.
You don't know?
Fentanyl is being mixed into everything now. There's only one thing that will save somebody's life. That is naloxone nasal spray.
Fentanyl, it's cheap, it's potent, and it's profitable.
Why would drug dealers put a lethal dose of fentanyl in drugs if they know it's so harmful?
Really just all about the money.
I just didn't realize that one pill could change your whole life.
More kids should know.
You can now watch MNN, Brick TV, QPTV, and SIC TV on BronxNet. Tune in to BxOmni, Channel 67 Optimum, 2133 Fios during most Sunday evenings. We'll show you some amazing content from our friends at Manhattan Neighborhood Network, Brick TV in Brooklyn, Queens Public Television, and Staten Island Community Television. Every borough represented in the Boogie Down. Epic partnerships for the ages. And catch our new Next channel, produced in partnership with MNN, 24/7 on BronxNet Channel 952 Optimum and 2138 Fios.
Welcome back. A recent study from the CDC found an increase of sexual violence towards teenage girls. The report reveals that in 2019, an estimated 850,000 high school girls reported that they had been raped. And by 2021, that estimate soared to more than 1 million. Executive Director for the New York City Alliance Against Sexual Assault, Emily Miles, joins me to discuss the finding. Emily, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Now, as we know, sadly, women and girls have endured a disproportionate number of sexual assault for decades. This isn't necessarily like new information, but could you just expand on this knowledge that we kind of already have?
Absolutely. So we know based on public health data that 1 in 4 women and 1 in 26 men report an attempted or completed sexual assault in their lifetime. So that's data we already knew. The recently released data from the CDC is from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, which is conducted every 2 years for students in grades 6 through 12. So these are children that are responding to these questions. And what the results found was that 1 in 5 teenage girls report that they have experienced sexual violence in the last year. 14% of teenage girls report being physically forced to have sex. And these numbers were really jarring to the public because when we think about this data overall, we tend to think of adults. But what we actually know about the data is that with those first numbers I told you, that 1 in 4 and 1 in 26 folks that identify as survivors of sexual violence in their lifetime, over 80% of those experienced their first instance of sexual violence before the age of 25, over 50% before the age of 18. So this is information we've known, but it shines a light on it in a way that we honestly haven't. And the public really tends to think that we're making progress with these numbers, but what this data shows is actually we're moving in the wrong direction.
Now, these are recent numbers. As you mentioned, they do it every 2 years. How has the pandemic increased this vulnerability?
Yeah, this survey is actually 2021 numbers that are being released now. And so when people think about what was happening in 2021, we think about children that were largely not in schools because this was during the pandemic. So these teenagers, these children were home, and we tend to think of that as a safe space. But we actually know because of the data that most cases of sexual violence actually occur with an acquaintance, a friend, a neighbor, or a family member. And so as these children and teens were home and in these close pods of people, they actually tended to be around people that were more likely to be perpetrators. Also, because they were home, they were disconnected from trusted people like friends and teachers and counselors. So if violence was escalating, they couldn't reach out to their social support in time to get assistance.
Now, as you mentioned that we aren't making the progress that we need to, this was something that the CDC's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Deborah Oury, also said. Why do you think, despite having all of this knowledge, and this is something that we know, why do you think it's a challenge for our society to move forward?
Yeah, I think it's a very complex question. And because of that, there's not just one answer for it. There's a couple of things. One, we as a society don't tend to talk about sexual violence. We see sexual relationships on TV, we see violence on TV, but when it actually comes to talking to children and youth about the realities of violence, we tend to shy away from the conversation. There's a high level of stigma around it. And because of that, we just don't talk about it. We don't teach children and teens about what the realities are. That's one thing. I think we also can't underestimate the impact that children and teens living in a more virtual space has. So when I was younger, you could go to school, you might be bullied, you might be harassed, you might have an instance of violence, but you could go home and you could disconnect. Your home could be a safe space. But because of the way of the world now, teens and children are connected to their social systems in largely virtual spaces. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. The problem comes is that when harassment occurs, when violence occurs, there's no way for them to then step out of that. There's no safe space, there's no respite. And the other thing that the data showed was that very high rates of depression and suicidality, especially among young girls. And a lot of that is because of this inability to disconnect and find safety.
Now, speaking of disconnecting, there has been a rise in online male figures who encourage violent behavior and ideologies toward women and girls. Do you think this could be impacting this finding that we're seeing?
Absolutely. It's not new that you have people with these types of voices and espousing these types of beliefs. This has gone on since the beginning of time. The difference, again, is now there's an online platform that allows these views to spread and, what I think most dangerously, become normalized. So the first time we sometimes hear some of this hate speech, to be quite honest, we kind of are taken aback and we might gasp, but then we hear it again and again and again. And every time we hear it, it becomes a little bit more normal to hear it. And so then you have that translated to young girls who are hearing this type of language and internalizing it, are young men who are hearing this type of language and internalizing it. And there's no counter voice for it because, again, we're not having these conversations as a society. And so, yes, I think that this changes our social norms as a society and doesn't allow the pushback of what actually is normal.
Right. Now, you also mentioned that this is considered hate speech, which I think a lot of people don't view it that way. Why do you think that, people see this stuff online and sometimes you try to report it, but nothing gets done, and a lot of these people just get a chance to, grow on these platforms? Why isn't it viewed as hate speech, do you think?
You know, obviously there is always going to be a conflict between our rights of free speech and how far that goes. For me, I think the line is when you start causing harm to someone else. And so it's one thing to espouse a belief, but when that belief then is used to harm someone else, there should be some level of oversight. And unfortunately, our current social media platforms lack that type of oversight. We've seen that recently with Twitter, with them pulling back a lot of the oversight there and the rise of hate speech that has happened. And so I think it's a lack of oversight and honestly, a lack of our comfort as a society to understand, where do we draw that line?
Now, is this a form of cyber sexual violence?
I would label it as such. And I'll also say that, and this wasn't as specifically covered in the data, but separate data shows that over the pandemic, we saw huge increases of rates of cybersexual violence because, again, people were home, they're engaging in a virtual space. So we have heard stories of children as young as 9 years old receiving explicit images online. Teenagers, again, who are continuously harassed, receiving unsolicited images. These instances have just continued to increase, and this lack of oversight has really made it more difficult.
Now, I want to bring up something because I know that a lot of people, especially a lot of teens, we watch certain types of shows that may have like negative portrayals of just sexual behavior, and it's not considered a good thing, but it's kind of framed as something that's a positive. I don't want to say any shows, but there are some that are out there. How do you think that contributes as well?
Again, I think it's a normalization. And some of those shows, I think I know the one you're talking about, do reflect common themes that teens and youth are dealing with. That itself isn't a problem. I think the problem is then, how do we then address those? Because we're not talking about healthy relationships. We're not talking about healthy sexual relationships. Instead, we're seeing the negative side. We're not seeing the positive side as well. Or we're not seeing necessarily youth being given the tools to then correct some of the negative stereotypes that exist. So again, it's all about balance. Those shows aren't bad. I enjoy them as well. It's really, though, like understanding that that's fiction. It's entertainment.
Now, unfortunately, in regard to reports about sexual assault, there are often underestimates because people fear speaking out. Can you just talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, there is a deep level of stigma when it comes to sexual violence in our society. So, when you think about it with youth specifically, you're talking about someone who's at an age in life where their friends and their peer cohort are the most important thing to them. So then, if you are a survivor of sexual violence and you come forward, the thing you fear the most is being separated from that support group. Your family, your friends, your peers being ostracized, being called names, and for that harassment and violence to increase. And unfortunately, when you look at public cases of survivors coming forward, look at the dialogue about how we talk about survivors. We always ask questions about what someone's wearing,
Right.
where they were they drinking?
Like victim blaming.
Exactly.
Pretty much, right?
Instead of then focusing on the perpetrator, the person who actually caused the act of violence.
Now, what does the role of sexual education play in this finding?
It's absolutely huge. When we talk about sex ed, the first thing people think about is talking about people's body parts or talking about birth control. But the truth is, that's just a small portion of what a comprehensive sex ed curriculum entails. We're talking about, what is a healthy relationship? How do you set boundaries for yourself? How do you negotiate saying no to something you're not comfortable with? And also important, how do you hear no and be okay with that? That's all part of comprehensive sex ed. But unfortunately, in New York State, we actually have no requirement for comprehensive sex ed as a state. And in New York City, even though that is a required part of curriculum, there's no requirement for what that curriculum needs to entail. So the level of quality varies from school to school.
Now, at what age do you think children should be taught about sexual violence and consent? I know this could be very controversial, but I want to hear your thoughts.
So bear with me for a second. We need to start when children are very young. I have a 4-year-old, and I am already having conversations with my 4-year-old that will set the stage for these deeper conversations as she gets older. Now, I am not talking about sex with my 4-year-old. What I'm talking about is how to be a good friend. How do we share our toys? How do you create boundaries for yourself with your body? So when we're leaving a social situation, if my 4-year-old doesn't want to hug someone goodbye, I don't force her to hug someone goodbye. Something within her body is telling her she doesn't feel comfortable. But we as a society tend to then say to those little kids, just do it anyway. Hug your aunt goodbye. Hug your neighbor goodbye. And what we're telling them is, override that feeling of discomfort and do something to make someone else happy. So we need to start when children are little, allowing them to feel powerful and being able to say, no, I don't want to do that. Something inside me is saying it's not okay and I don't want to. And the building blocks of that then allow someone to grow up with a confidence to be able to negotiate boundaries. You know, we don't start math with kindergartners and teach them calculus. We teach them to identify numbers, we teach them to count, and then we build in an age-appropriate way. And then when they're teenagers or older, in my case, we start learning complex math skills. This is the same thing when we talk about comprehensive sex education. We talk about consent, we talk about being a good friend, so that when you're a teenager, you then know how to set boundaries and you know how to receive boundaries from others.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That was really insightful. And you know, I really appreciate a lot of what you said. So thank you so much for that. Now, I have one last question really quickly. Can you just tell me, you know, focusing on the perpetrators of sexual violence towards women and girls, what can society do? And by that, I mean, should there be harsher consequences, stricter laws? Can you just talk about that really quickly?
Absolutely. So we as a society don't have a great track record with the criminal justice system and supporting survivors of sexual violence. I don't think that this is something we can incarcerate our way out of. That hasn't worked with any other issue in this country, and I don't think it works for this one as well. There does need to be accountability. There does need to be the repair of harm. But again, us just having stricter penalties is not actually going to solve this problem. It's a Band-Aid. What's going to solve this problem is us creating the societal change to think differently about how do we talk about relationships, how do we talk about sex, how do we talk about power, and then from that, change the norms in this country about how we then engage with a survivor of sexual violence. So yes, there needs to be accountability, but if we're only doing that and not stopping the wave of sexual violence, it's never going to end.
Well, Emily, thank you so much for joining me to talk about this. I definitely learned a lot.
Thank you so much.
If you would like to know more about the CDC Youth Risk Behavior Survey, please go to their website, www.cdc.gov. And to keep up with the New York Alliance Against Sexual Assault, follow them on Instagram at NYC Alliance or go to their website at www.svfreenyc.org. We have to take a quick break, but we'll be back with more Open right after this.
Kids!
I don't want to talk about it.
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 Families don't have to talk about everything, but they should talk about how to plan for an emergency.
Kids, you all right?
This family's prepared. Get tips and resources to make your family's emergency plan. Go to nyc.gov/readyny or call 311 for more information.
You can talk to me if you're feeling sad.
Thanks for hearing me out, bro.
Whenever you need to talk, I'm here, okay?
Did you know dragging chains can spark a wildfire?
Only you can prevent wildfire.
I know what you're thinking. I need a job.
Well, I've been there.
I've been there.
But you gotta keep going.
You just need the right skills. Find an apprenticeship.
I found a course online.
You can do this.
You will find something.
You will find something new.
How do you know when you've made the right decision? It's the feeling you get in your gut. The one that tells you what's right or wrong. It's the one that says, sure, I can have a drink. Or the feeling that says, okay, I've been drinking. Now what? It's the voice inside you that says, I'm buzzed. Better leave the car when it's time to go. Plan ahead. Catch a sober ride. Buzz driving is drunk driving.
Welcome back. A playwright and performing artist from the Bronx takes the stage with the story of Sanchocho. The play follows two Puerto Rican sisters while they face their journey with family dynamics and cultural divides. On their journey, the clashing sisters reveal deep secrets as they address old wounds. Playwright Christin Eve Cato now joins me to discuss. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Now, can you talk just a little bit about your background in theater and script writing?
Yeah, so I started theater in middle school in the Bronx. We had a little theater program where we did shows like Oklahoma. We did Little Shop of Horrors. We did Grease, A Christmas Carol. It was a fun experience, and I think that middle school experience definitely shaped my love for theater. And then I went to LaGuardia High School for vocal music.
Which, congratulations on that. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great experience. That school was just amazing. I mean, it opened my horizons, you know. And studying vocal music there, I got more into musical theater. And then post-college, I went back into the theater world because I think I went to Fordham University, and when I went to Fordham, it was more about Plan B, whatever that means, you know, when you're the first to graduate from college in your family.
Right.
So, but I studied political science and philosophy, which I mention a lot because it's so integral to my writing process. As a political scientist and as a philosopher, you know, a lot of my work is about activism, is about social issues, is about existentialism and how we exist and how we coexist in the world. And so all of that background really informs my writing today, the music, the political science and philosophy.
Well, we definitely see that in your story, Sanchocho, which hopefully I'm saying correct.
Sanchocho.
Sanchocho.
Yeah.
Now, can you first tell me what that is? We want to talk about the play, but can you just explain for those who are not familiar what that is?
Absolutely. So Sanchocho is a stew, right? And so it's a stew that you find in Puerto Rico, but you'll also find it in Dominican Republic. You'll also find it's a Caribbean stew, and many places in Latin America too. And so the Puerto Rican Sanchocho has a traditional way to cook it is with oxtail or with a beef, like a beef chunk, and it's a stew that just has all these roots in it, like potatoes, carrots, yuca, yautilla, squash, right? Like we call it calabaza. I was going to say calabaza, but yes, pumpkin, ñame, which are these yams, you know? And so all these root vegetables, you could put carrots and corn, and it creates this thick stew that nourishes like a whole family. Like you make a big pot of it. It takes all day, you know, but it's a stew that really traces our lineage. Because in Puerto Rico, you know, we have we're a diaspora, right? We're African, we're Taino, right? And so a lot of these roots come from those roots. And so it's a very traditional stew that really traces back our history as a people.
Now, can you tell us how you decided to basically name that, you know, for the play, and tell us a little bit more about what the play is about?
Yeah, so as I grew up, like Sanchocho was a standard meal in my home. Like my grandmother always made it, and it was so good, and it's so healing. There's something healing about that stew. And during the pandemic, I wanted to write a story because I was in grad school, right? I was at Indiana University. I was away from my family, and this is like 2020 during the pandemic, and I was missing all the women in my family. I was alone. It was a very lonely time, and I wanted to. There were just so many things that were coming up for me in that moment. And I was just remembering the strength of my family, the strength of my ancestors. That's what was comforting me in that lonely time. And so I wanted to remember them. And my grandmother was in hospice at that time, so I wanted to remember her as well, and what she taught me. And I made sancocho. And then as I was making sancocho for myself, I was just like, I need to write about this. I need to write about what I'm feeling, what I'm experiencing right now, because I'm peeling this yuca, I'm peeling this cassava, I'm peeling it, and it's thick. It's waxy, right? But then when you peel underneath, you get this nutrition, right? And so I was like, let me peel these layers off and just and write this story about the women that I know, that in my family, in my friendships. And so that's when I started writing Sancocho. And it's about two sisters who are 25 years apart. And they come together to discuss some very serious, complicated things, right? And their father's dying, and there's a lot of things to discuss. And when death comes near, there's a lot of secrets.
Right.
And all the while that they're speaking about these, complex things that are very traumatic and full of pain, they're making sancocho. Well, Caridad is the older sister. She's making sancocho, and they're actually cooking it on the stage too. And so this act of making sancocho is a healing aspect to what they're both talking about throughout this play.
Now, I understand that this play has an all Latinx cast and creative team. Can you just explain why that was important to you?
Oh, yeah, because I think for me it was important because it was important to have people in the room who really understand the world. I think in order to build it authentically you need people who understand what this place might look like, what this place will smell like.
Right.
And just to add to the vibes. I mean, like on Sunday night after like our second preview, our producer Nidia had made sancocho at home and brought it to the cast and the crew. And after the show, we were all eating sancocho together. And like that's the kind of experience that we should be having as theater makers, especially when we make stories that hit so close to home. And this story, although it's a universal story, but I know that it impacts a lot of Latinos because it's a common story.
Now, I want to touch on, just like in this industry, when we're talking about movies, TV, and theater, sometimes other people are telling our stories, and they may do it like a really great job, but, can you just explain why it's important from, just people in communities of color or even people from the Bronx to be the ones to tell their own stories?
Well, yeah, because they're the ones living it. They're the ones who know what the story is. They have the insight. You can't authentically tell a story from the outside, and if you are from the if you are writing a story from the outside, I think culturally you need to understand what you're writing about,
right,
or what story you're telling. And there's been enough of whitewashing in our history. There's been enough of white people telling our stories for us or rewriting our stories. So we need to tell our stories so that our perspective is heard, and so that the next generation and the generations after can have access to those archives.
Now, I know this may feel like a loaded question because you already mentioned there's so many themes, but what emotion or response do you want to evoke in your audience when they interact with the play?
Laughter, joy, healing, crying, collective sighs, warm hearts, and soft eyes.
That sounds nice. And it's a lot. It's like a whole, you're going to experience everything. So I
Yes,
think that's good.
exactly.
Now, in comparison to streaming or the movie experience, have you found people connecting to stories in theater the same way? I know sometimes accessibility could be, a factor. Coming from a background in theater, what have you noticed in regard to that?
Well, I think theater will always live. Theater will never die because it's live, and and like you see actors on stage evoking this emotion. And I think that visceral feeling it captures you as an audience member, and you feel along with the story. And I think that that experience I mean, although it can be replicated in the visual, like TV and film area, I just feel like when it comes to theater, it's more about the words. It's more about the characters. It's very character driven. It's very it's where the writer really gets to tell the story and flourish. It's not so much visuals, but it's storytelling at its best, you know. And I think that, and about the accessibility point, I mean, that's why we need to make it more accessible, because it's theater has been part of the culture since forever. I mean, if you trace back our lineages and our ancestry, people were sitting around and telling oral stories. That's how that's our history as like people, as humans. And so I think that making theater more accessible for people, especially in the Bronx, is so important. And that's why theater needs to tell more of our stories too, because we have to include everyone.
I could imagine if you're like not hearing your own story and it's expensive.
Then why would you go?
Right, exactly.
You know? And that's another thing.
Right.
Like tickets are expensive, so people, you know, they feel like, why would I go?
Right.
But if it's something that represents you and something that you can connect with,
right,
then you know you'd pay $50 for a ticket the same way you'd pay $50 at a dinner.
Right. Now, I also want to talk about, you know, just you being from the Bronx and pursuing this. I know for a lot of people, like they're told like that's just a dream, or that's not something, like you mentioned having like a plan B. Can you just talk about that for a lot of people who come from the Bronx or low income areas?
Yeah, because theater's hard. Being an artist is hard. You know, this we don't do it for the money.
Right.
You know, but it, and so when you come from a poor or low income background, you have to think about your future, and you have to think about sustainability, and you have to think about, you know, like how am I going to live and survive? And oftentimes theater and artistry, that's not the road to go, because it's a hard road to take. It takes a lot of perseverance. It takes a lot of will, and it's possible. Like, it's not impossible. And that's something I definitely want to share. You know, like I think where there's a will, there's a way. There's always jobs. There's always work. There's always ways to make money. You know, and I think that that shouldn't deter you from your dreams. That shouldn't deter you. You should still follow your dreams, always.
Now, very, very quickly, what are ways people can further support, you know, Bronx artists and, you know, people who are in this field?
Show up. Show up. It's so essential to show up. Yeah, show up, spread the word, tell people about it. So that's the best support. That is the best support. Like a body in the space is the best way to show support.
Well, Christin, thank you so much for joining me to talk about this. I learned a lot, and I want to learn a little bit more about Sanchocho as well. So, you know, it sounds really good. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You'll be able to view the play Sanchocho from now until April 9th at the WP Theater. And to stay in touch with Christin, you can go to her website at www.ChristinEveCato.com. We've come to the end of our show today. I'd like to thank all of our guests for joining us and you, the viewers, for tuning in. If you missed any part of today's show, you can catch the recable cast at 5 and 10 p.m. on Optimum Channel 67 and Verizon Fios Channel 33, or watch anytime on the web at BronxNet.org. I'm Kibin Alleyne, wishing you and yours safety and wellness now and always. See you next time.